Well, my name's Ollie Bray, and I currently work for Education Scotland, the national agency to support and evaluate education in Scotland. And I've been asked just in the next few minutes to give you some thoughts on internet safety and responsible use. And I guess there's a few key issues here that are emerging that I want to cover first, and then talk about how we might, as people that want to evaluate youth voice and participation, how we might use some of these issues as we gather responses from children. And as I go through this talk, I'm going to mention a little bit of research, but one of the most interesting bits of research that I came across a couple of years ago now, which I think is useful in terms of discussion, is some research from Channel 4, which talked about the digital habits of young people between the ages of 11 and 21. And there are a couple of interesting things that this threw up. The first interesting thing that it threw up is that many young people in this category have at least 8 different devices that can connect to the internet. And why is this important for us in terms of digital evaluation? Well, it's really, really important because most of these devices that can connect to the internet are mobile devices, which it means that anything that we do in terms of trying to gather youth response or to collaborate with young people needs to be highly optimized for mobile, because that's highly likely to be the platform or the digital platform that they'll engage with this media on. The next thing that the research threw up is that one of the first things that this group of young people do is that they turn on the computer when they get home, either from school or from college or from university or from the workplace. And why do they turn on the computer? Well, they turn on the computer to communicate with each other. Now, this throws up some other interesting questions like, do we not let children communicate enough at school, for example? But of course, the main point that we need to get across here is that young people, certainly within this research category, 11 and 21, are used to communicating with each other online. So if we feel a little bit nervous and about that and a little bit uncomfortable about it, we shouldn't be worried about the young people here. It's our job to gain the confidence and then to try and use the tools that young people are already using in order to communicate with them, in order to develop youth participation. The next kind of thing, I guess, that the research threw up was this whole idea, and I find this quite bizarre really, that 25% of the young people surveyed said that they would rather stay at home rather than go on holiday without a mobile phone. And the reason that I think that's a really kind of interesting statistic is because I'm pretty sure if we asked this group of young people this either 5 years ago or even 10 years ago, the figure would have certainly been a lot lower or even perhaps non-existent. And it's a great example of, I think, how technology is changing youth culture. Indeed, there'll be lots of people that would even starting to argue that actually technology is starting to wire young people completely differently as well. One of the other, or the last piece of research I'm going to mention from the Channel 4 work was this idea that, again, young people in this category had about 123 friends on social networking sites. And again, if you drill down into the data, it was the older people that had 123 friends, and quite often the younger children who had a lot more than that. Obviously, these people aren't necessarily these children's friends; they're just acquaintances that they've made on these social networking spaces. And the reason this is important, I think, is because this is all about understanding language. Because actually, technology has not only started to change youth culture, but it's started to change the meaning of words as well. And if we're participating with young people, it's vitally important that we speak in the same language, in exactly the same way that we might adapt a survey to be more appropriate for very, very young children, perhaps 6 or 7-year-olds. It would be different language that we might use to engage with 17 or 18-year-olds. But we also need to think about not just accessible language, but different types of language which take into account the changes of technology and the changes of the language that this brings along as well. And a great little example of this might be, for example, to look at a picture of a camera. And of course, if we were looking at a picture of a camera, then lots of people would think this is a picture of a digital camera. And if we were to show the same picture to a group of 6 or 7-year-olds, I think they'd probably say this is just a picture of a camera, because actually technology again has changed what objects mean to different groups of people. And this is no different with this word friend. And why this word friend is particularly important, of course, is because a friend to some young people is just an acquaintance that they meet on a social networking space, where a friend to somebody with more perceived wisdom or an adult might be somebody that they trust, somebody they're willing to share personal information with. And this is a question that we need to keep asking young people, and it's vitally important for the whole internet safety and responsible use agenda. And one of the reasons for that is because there are actually some pretty horrible websites that are available out there now, where young people can sign up to the website, they can pick a social media service that they like, and the website will automatically search the public-facing versions of this website, and young people can quickly become friends with people that they've never met before. And this is a great worry for us in education because some of the most severe child protection cases that we've had around internet safety and responsible use in Scotland, have made use of either this website or similar websites as well. And it's important that we understand as adults that these websites exist, so again we can pass on this information to children to make sure that they stay safe online. And I guess what I'm trying to get at here is it's really, really important that we understand if we're working with young people that perhaps young people maybe aren't the same as they used to be. And one of the reasons I don't think they're the same as they used to be is because now young people have got access to almost unlimited information via the internet or via mobile phone devices. And sometimes young people come into contact with information that they might not be emotionally ready for. And a great example of that is actually the BBC, not some of the content that you might think I might mention here. And the reason that the BBC is a great example of that is because 10 years ago, if you wanted to watch a programme on the BBC, after 9:30 at night, you could probably be guaranteed that that programme might have a bit more kind of sexual content in it or some bad language, it might be a little bit more risque. Now, of course, you can go on to technologies like BBC iPlayer and you can tick a box to say that you're over 18 or over 16 and you can view any of this content at any time of the day. Now, that's not necessarily a problem if the children are old enough and mature enough to see it, but also it does present some other issues that now young people are getting access to this information they might not have had access to before. And actually, this is a really important point in terms of internet safety and responsible use, because one of the most common messages that we give to children about staying safe online is you need to be really careful because the people that you meet online might not be who they say they are. Yet actually we've got thousands and thousands of children across Scotland or around the rest of the world who are not who they say they are online because they're lying about their identity and they're lying about their ages. So of course, in terms of the internet safety and responsible use messages that we need to be getting to children, maybe we need to change our core messages. It's got to be about responsible use, rather than actually about the kind of safety part of it, or the two have to certainly run in parallel. So what's the kind of advice here? Well, I think the biggest advice for young people, first of all, is making sure that we talk to children. And obviously, along with talking to children, we need to make sure that we listen to children as well. And what I mean by this is that when we talk to children about their experiences, we don't discount the experiences that happen online, because again, there's a growing body of research which suggests, in particular from the Child Exploitation Online Protection Agency, that young people now see absolutely no difference at all between their online life and their real life and their physical life. And we need to acknowledge that as adults so that we're engaging with both aspects of it and talking to children about experiences in both places. And of course, one of the biggest things that we need to make sure that we're talking to young people about is this idea of privacy. And again, this is really important from a consultation and research point of view. And again, it comes back to language. Now, quite often, if you ask a group of young people, are they concerned about their privacy, they'll normally say yes. But the reality of it is, of course, if you ask that same group of people again, what does privacy mean, then you won't actually get a definitive answer. And that's because actually the term is very, very difficult to understand, and we need to make sure that we're making it as accessible as possible for young people. Now, there's some interesting research from Pew Internet which came out in the United States which suggests that privacy is more important to children than ever before. And I expect it is. But again, if we're not getting the language right and we're not getting the definitions right, then that's going to be really hard to enforce. And of course, one of the problems that we come up against is that even though in the UK we've got lots of laws that protect us about privacy, quite often the technology is a lot further ahead than the law. And a great example of that, for example, might be CCTV. CCTV, there are laws that are in place to protect us, but one of the challenges of that, of course, is that there are no laws that are in place to protect us about public-facing webcams. And public-facing webcams, which you quite often get in most tourist destinations, are normally very, very high quality. They're normally constantly streaming all of the time, and because they're webcams, not CCTV, because they're live streamed to the net, then actually there are no laws that protect us about these things. The technology is evolving so fast, the laws in themselves haven't really caught up for this. And of course, the other thing that we need to remember is this idea that actually many young people actually give their content away. So privacy is great to protect us as long as we agree to the privacy terms and conditions. But quite often young people, and it's not just young people, it's adults as well, they'll often give away a lot of personal information, in which case obviously the law doesn't apply. An interesting task to try here is to try Googling yourself and Google yourself with speech marks around it and see what's been written about you. And do this quite often, because what we find now, of course, is that increasingly historical newspapers, or not historical, but older newspapers from 10 or 15 or 20 years ago, are starting to be digitised, and you'll find articles of yourself when you were at school or when you're at college or when you're at university, and these are now searchable by Google, and they'll appear. The telephone directory in the UK is another great example of this. If you're not ex-directory, chances are your name, address and telephone number will be available publicly to be searched online. And again, this has the possibilities for making children vulnerable. And of course, we can also search public records as well. We can get access to information like the census, and we can also get information from the electoral roll. And all this information, can be used to find out information about people, which potentially is absolutely fine if we agree to it and we know that we're agreeing to it. But if we're doing it without our real knowledge, because we don't understand the terms and conditions and we don't understand privacy, then potentially it might make people vulnerable. So it's thinking about how can we use these tools responsibly. So let's have a quick talk maybe about some strategies and things that we definitely need to remember. I guess the first thing is that when we talk about internet safety and responsible use, we really need to have the emphasis on the responsible use. Because this has got to be about education. It can't be about locking and blocking and banning young people from accessing these services. That doesn't help things at all. It's sticking a sticky plaster on a broken arm. It's not solving the real problem. It's just correcting it for the time being. The other thing that we need to do, and this obviously comes back to this idea of language again, is we need to stop talking about e-safety actually. And the reason that we need to stop talking about e-safety, and I extend this to talking about things like e-assessment and e-learning and e-portfolio as well, is because this is 2012 now, and actually electronic and digital has infiltrated every single aspect of our lives, it would seem, apart from schools and education. So of course, we shouldn't be talking about e-safety, we should just be talking about safety, because actually the online world is as important for children and young people as the offline world. And we need to make sure as well, obviously, that we've mentioned before, that we're talking to children and young people, and we're talking about what types of websites they use online, the names of websites, but also perhaps more importantly, because we're not going to be able to go and explore every single website, we talk to young people about what does the website do. And then if we can get an idea about what the website does and what young people enjoy doing online, we can hopefully bring that into how we might gather information from children to do things. So for example, if young people like taking video and editing video and adding music to it, how can we use that in order to develop ways of participation? And the last thing, of course, or two last things to add, would be this idea of this accessibility. So we need to make sure that if we're going to get information from young people, we need to explain very, very clearly what we're doing. But as we explain very, very carefully what we're doing, is we need to make sure that this is done in an accessible way. And we're starting to see some interesting examples of this now. So instead of a long 3 or 4 page document explaining to young people what the research methodology will be, that still exists and it's still there to be read, but actually that might be summarised as a form of YouTube video or funny video or as a cartoon, something which is actually going to be quite inspiring and captivating for children to get the key messages across. And hopefully that will mean then they read the other information in a little bit more detail as well. And of course, I guess the final thing to say would be any systems where we're going to be collecting personal information from children online, we need to make sure that the systems that we're using, whether they're free or whether they're systems we developed ourselves or systems that we've commissioned, we need to make sure that we actually understand where the data will be held. It's not necessarily got to be in the UK or in Europe, but we need to make sure where that information will be. We need to make sure that as young people are filling in surveys, for example, instead of seeing their HTTP in the top left-hand corner, we're seeing HTTPS to make sure it's a secure place. And I guess my kind of final point or observation here will be, there's a great games designer, Cliff Dennett, and he's always maintained that the solution's in the problem. So my question here really, or something maybe just to think about, is that if the problem is digital media, for example, if young people aren't using digital media responsibly, how can we also make that the solution? Well, a way to do that, of course, is to make sure that we're embedding responsible use training into the digital media tools that the children are using. So my kind of wish, I think, for anybody that's using digital media in terms of participation with young people is built into any kind of survey or consultation or anything like that is also a degree of responsible use training so that children are knowing how to use these tools responsibly and so that they can take the ideas for using these tools and transfer them to other digital tools that they might use online either now or in the future.